Good morning, everybody. Bobo, go lay down. Go on. Thank you. Bye-bye. Go to bed. Go to bed. I thought I would show you in my incredibly messy kitchen because it's Saturday and I have about 8 projects happening, so just try to look away. I'm going to blanch some broccoli and some kale for freezing. And I thought I would show you how that works. And so I can never remember how much time you're supposed to do for each one. So I'm looking it up. This is the Ball Blue Book of Preserving. You can also look this up on the National Center for Home Food Preservation website. It's not the most gorgeous website in the world, but it is the Bible for all things canning and preserving in terms of what the U.S. government thinks is the safe way to do things. But this is a great reference book, and I use it all the time. I've been using it for years. Actually, this is a newer copy. My old copy is so old the pages are falling out. When all else fails, refer to the internet. So what we're going to do, looks like the average time typically suggested is about 2 minutes, 2 to 2.5 minutes. So that's what I'm going to do. The reason for blanching before you freeze, particularly with greens, one is to just wilt them down so they take up a huge amount less room. But secondly, it's to basically stop any enzymatic reactions that are happening within the plant. My dishwasher is full of clean dishes that aren't quite done yet, so I can't put this away. Sorry about that. And so they will last a lot longer in the freezer and taste better if you blanch them before you dip them in boiling water. These have minor aphid issues, and so I'm just gonna kind of go through here, give everybody a quick rinse, look for any aphids. There's some. And the aphids, you can just discard. That's not worth even bothering saving. You can discard stuff with aphids on it, or if it's just a little bit, honestly, if you eat an aphid, it's gonna taste like kale because that's what the aphids have been eating. And I just try to rinse them off. They will also come off in the boiling water. And honestly, I would rather have a few aphids on my kale than I would have kale that's been sprayed with some kind of toxic pesticide that sinks into the plant and is there when you eat it later. It is the one problem I have with kale generally, is that they tend to get pretty aphidy just about this time of year, so we're right on target. See how that leaf is curled? That's a really good indication that the aphids have gotten into it, so I expect this to be bad. And it is. Oh my goodness, look at all those guys. Try not to spray that directly on the other leaves, just for good practices. What happens is the aphids are sucking the juices out of the plants. They have little straws for mouths, and they pierce the leaf and then get in there. And so that's why the plant curls up, because it's getting damage. And so anytime you see that, it's a good indication that you've got something going on. It's also makes it a lot harder to treat. It's a very savvy thing for the aphids to be doing, because most of these look great, because it curls the leaf up, and then it's very hard for anything to get in there, including anything you might want to spray on it, including insecticidal soap or a little pyrethrin or some neem oil. Those all work on aphids, but it's very hard to spray that spot when it's all curled up. Plug is clearly plugged there. There's another bad spot. Goodness sakes. And this is what they do. Like, one aphid gets in there and they just start having a party. And if I remember right, aphids are able to reproduce even without any males around. So they can just basically make more of themselves whenever they want. They're kind of evil little buggers in that sense. And there are many, many, many different kinds of aphids in the world, and a lot of them specialize on certain plants. So the aphids that you see on your kale may not be the same aphids that you see on another food crop. It could be a completely different kind of aphid. However, they're all soft-bodied insects, and they all are pretty much treated the same way if you're spraying for them. But it's just interesting that there's a lot of different kinds, and sometimes they are white, sometimes they're green, sometimes they're gray. The ones on the kale tend to be kind of a gray in color. Sometimes they can even be black. So there can be a lot of different colors of aphids out there in the world. It's a very diverse group. I personally prefer pyrethrins when I spray. I know a lot of people don't like pyrethrin as an organic spray because it's pretty non-selective. And so if you spray it on a bee, it will hurt the bee. If you spray it on a ladybug, it might hurt the ladybug. However, I don't have a lot of those because there's nothing blooming on my kale. It's just leaves. I don't tend to have a lot of bees in my kale because there's no nectar for them. And that one's just not even worth bothering with. And I look for ladybugs and make sure that they're not in there doing their job before I spray. But pyrethrins, they will stay on the leaf for a few days, and they have to be eaten by the insect in order to work. So you don't necessarily have to hit the bug directly. You can spray the plant, and then when the bug eats that part of the plant, they get sick and stop reproducing and die. And so they are kind of my go-to choice, just because, God, you can go out and spray for aphids every single day. And if all you're doing is knocking off or killing directly the aphids that you hit and not getting everything, because it's almost impossible to get everything, you will just literally be out there every day. And if I'm spraying with a pyrethrin, I can spray once a week and have pretty good success. So I like a pyrethrin, even though a lot of people discourage them. So now what I'm going to do, and you've seen me do this in other videos, I've got some kale salad videos and some other kale videos. I'm just going to strip off the leaves here with my finger, and where it breaks is usually more tender in terms of the stem, and so I'm not worried about getting all of that out. I might pull a little bit more of this one out. You can eat the stems. There's nothing wrong with it. They're just a little tougher. They take longer to cook, and kale is so prolific that I don't need to be saving every stem of every kale leaf. I got plenty of other things to eat. We are also going to be blanching some broccoli. I'm going to do that next, but I thought I'd start with the kale. And you can strip this and then chop it and then blanch it, or you can just blanch it from this point and then chop it. I tend to do the latter. It's really a personal preference. I think it's a lot easier to chop once it's cooked, and so I prefer to just throw it in the cooker and chop it once it's wilted. This is kind of fun. There's something really satisfying when it just strips off like that, and you're like, yes! Makes you feel like have a superpower. And the bigger leaves do that easier than the smaller ones do, because they're a little tougher. I didn't weigh this. I'm not sure what our starting weight is. I don't really care. I've got lots of kale. But I'm going to blanch and freeze this, and then I will use it later in the winter in a variety of things, including several kale soups that I make that I really like. But I don't want to eat a lot of kale soup this time of year. And kale is one of those things where it's quite prolific, and you need to keep picking it in order for it to keep producing. And so I just stuff a lot of it in my freezer this time of year. I do have several other recipes coming that will involve fresh kale as well. But we'll see an appearance of this frozen kale probably in the winter videos once I get that far along. So this is a big stainless steel pot. Again, ignore my dirty kitchen. And then inside of this, I happen to have like a spaghetti pot. I picked this up at an estate sale, and it's really handy for doing this kind of blanching, because you can just lift the entire pot out at once instead of trying to fish out what you're cooking. Oops. We're gonna call 5-second rule on that because it's gonna get boiled anyway. And I like to get everything in the pot before I stir it down so that things are cooking fairly evenly. And I'm just gonna poke everything down into that water. And I could wait until this came back to a full rolling boil. I think that would take long enough that this would be overcooked. So I'm not gonna do that. I'm literally gonna start timing once everything is under this boiling water. And it's very hot. I've had this pot on the stove for a while. And then I'm just gonna set a timer for 2 minutes. And then once this is done blanching, you wanna cool it off as fast as possible. And so usually they talk about ice water. I like to just dip it in cold water to get the worst of the heat off, and then I might throw some ice in. But initially I just do some cold water. So we're gonna get that going. Okay, so our timer's gone off. It's been 2 minutes. I'm gonna give that one more quick stir just to make sure everybody's happy and that the stuff at the top didn't get less. All right, there you go, blanch. So you're not really trying to cook them. You're just trying to stop any enzymatic reaction that's going on in that plant while it's still raw in order to preserve the best flavor for freezing. All right. So that's gonna cool off quite quickly because I'm swirling it around in there. And see, just like that, I brought it down to basically room temperature, which is what you want. So now what I'm gonna do is take my salad spinner, fill it full of cold water, throw some ice in that water so it's really cold. Conveniently, they're sticking to my fingers because my hands are wet. There we go. Okay. So now I've got really cold ice water. You can see I have several videos where I show this salad spinner, and I use it for a lot of things. It is definitely a tool worth buying. It seems kind of frivolous when you first think about it, but honestly, you will use it for more than just spinning salad. All right, so now I'm getting that really cold, definitely stopping any cooking. And I'm gonna put my basket back in the water because I'm gonna do some broccoli in that same water and not have to boil the whole pot again. Okay, so this is nice and chilled. Let that drain a bit. Shake it out good. Give it a good spin. It's probably a bit lopsided because it always turns out to be kind of lopsided to start with. These things don't spin well if they're lopsided. I'm also gonna They also don't spin well if there's a lot of water in the bottom. Okay, not perfect in terms of not being lopsided, but pretty close. Do one more. All right, good enough. So now we have blanched, rinsed, pretty dry kale. And I'm just going to dump that out. And you can squeeze individual handfuls of this out if you want, but most of the water is out of it. It's not too bad. That spraying really helps. Spinach is harder. It really holds water better. And the idea is to get water off of this one so that you're not just having to deal with the water when you unthaw it. But also, every little ice crystal pokes holes in the leaves of this. So when you unthaw it, you know, it's good for mixing into things, but it's not going to have a lot of firmness because essentially a million little ice crystals have just poked holes in every cell in this stuff, which is why it's good for soups and things. But because of that, I know I'm not going to get all the water out, no matter what I do, because some of it's just still in the cell walls. So I'm not going to be super precious about trying to squeeze out every little drop of water, because no matter what I do, I can't get it all out of there. So you can see I've just kind of wadded that up, and I'm giving everything a good chop, probably about an inch or so. It doesn't have to be perfect. Again, I'm probably gonna use this in a soup as long as it's bite-sized, or I might use it in some kind of a puree. And I like, for freezing this kind of thing, I have a food vacuum sealer, and I do use it occasionally, but it is a giant pain in the butt to get it out and fuss with it. And so unless I'm doing a lot of something, I tend to just use freezer bags. Cooks Illustrated years ago did a test on freezer bags, and Ziploc won their test in terms of like best seal, best condition after a certain period of time, blah, blah, blah. So it's actually worth, if you're not going to eat stuff within the first 3 months, which is often the case for me. I sometimes have greens in my freezer that are several years old. It is better to spend a little more money on a quality freezer bag than it is to cheap out on a house brand. So I buy the Ziploc. You do you. And then I'm just rolling this to try to get as much air out of here as possible. And there you go. I have a nice little knob of frozen or blanched kale. And just out of curiosity, so we'll tear this so we're not weighing the bag. So that is almost 11 ounces of kale that we just did there. Cooks down pretty good, less than a pound. But a typical frozen little block of greens like spinach or kale in the grocery store is around 10 ounces. And so that's a nice size for most recipes. And then mark what's in there. And when you put it in there so you have some idea. I do like to put the weight just because it's handy if I'm making something big or something small. And this is July. We're officially in July. So there you go. And then that just gets thrown in your freezer. So that is how you blanch and freeze kale. And actually the process would be very similar for spinach, for chard. If you were doing collards, it's also similar, but you would cook it for slightly longer. I think the recommended time on collards is 3 minutes, just because they're a thicker leaf. But that's all there is to it. And now you have kale in your freezer for future meals. This also is good in smoothies. If you're doing kale in smoothies, just breaking off a chunk of this and throwing it in is really handy. You can unthaw this and then just saute it and have it ready, you know, as a side dish. That also works. Doesn't take much additional cooking because it's pretty much done. I have 2 chest freezers. That one is for meat. This one is for frozen stuff. So here's spinach that I did in May when the spinach was still coming. And then our kale is done.